Good morning and welcome back to Channel 514 as we continue our series exploring ancient literature. And we are now beginning to explore Greek literature. And so, as we did with Mesopotamia and Egypt, I think we will begin with a little bit of an introduction to Greek civilization in general. So, our series, of course, is about literature. So primarily we're not dealing with history or art history or architecture or mythology or any of these other subjects, of which, of course, a great deal can be said, and there's much to read, of course, but primarily we're going to be talking about literature. But to set it up, I think it would help to introduce Greek civilization a little bit, just to put us on our feet. And I'll try to make this as short as possible and really only hit upon important key information rather than give a whole long disquisition. And believe me, with a subject like this, it would be easy to go on at great length, especially when you have a long-term abiding interest in the subject. And so I have some books here that I'm going to use to provide us with illustrations, but let's get right into it. Now, Greece, I'll show a map. I showed maps of Mesopotamia and Egypt, so I may as well show a map of Greece also. So to do that, I'll go to this handy book here, the Penguin Historical Atlas of Ancient Greece. Penguin has historical atlases like these for a lot of different periods in history. So here is the first of the maps of Greece included in here. And so there you have the mainland around here. You have this peninsula, the Peloponnese, down here, which is technically an island since the construction of the Corinth Canal in the 19th century. And out here you have all these islands. You have Crete way down here, the biggest of the islands, and then over here you have the coast of Anatolia, or Asia Minor, where there were a lot of Greek city-states. And so up here you have Thrace, of course, and you have some more areas where there were Greek city-states on the coast there. So this, of course, here is the Aegean Sea, and down here is the Ionian Sea. And what else is there to say? You see Sea of Crete here, although most maps don't bother to say anything about a Sea of Crete. But anyway, that, of course, all of this is in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, there may not be a map in here that will really serve our purposes for another subject that I want to broach here. It would be a ways into the book, because the Greek world, here we are, here's a really good one actually. The Greek world, of course, is much broader a thing than Greece itself, so you can see on this map where all these Greek colonies were in antiquity. So you have this whole Black Sea area around here with different colonies. The Greeks called the Black Sea the Pontus, and so if you know anything about Roman history, you know there was a province called Bithynia and Pontus, and that would have been around here, Bithynia, and up here, Pontus. So anyway, let's see. Then, of course, you have Anatolia. We talked about that already. You have Cyprus, and you have Spain way over here. There was a Greek colony there, Emporion. Got the North African coast. Where is Cyrenaica? Here is Cyrenaica, where there was a Greek capital, Cyrene, or Kyrene. So if you are familiar with the Passion narratives in the Gospels, you know Simon of Cyrene, so this was the area, Cyrene, where he would have been from. And that city, of course, was a Greek colony. And let's see, you have Sicily, I don't know how well that actually shows up on the map, but I guess it gets oh, here it is. It's kind of crushed between the pages, but Sicily and Sardinia, and you see that whole area, the central Mediterranean. Then, of course, in southern Italy, there were lots of Greek colonies there too. So when we say the Greek world, we mean something a lot broader than what we think of today as Greece. So anyway, we've covered that now. So there are also a lot of periods in Greek history that I think we should describe or at least mention in passing. Now, well, not so much in passing, but we should mention cursorily, I should say, before getting any farther. Now, there is a long prehistory in Greece, so there were people there for many thousands of years before the times that we think of as Greek history or ancient Greece or whatever. So these prehistoric peoples, of course, they didn't leave us any literature, so we don't really need to talk much about them, but I just want to mention there were prehistoric peoples in Greece for a long time. And the Greeks themselves, they believed that before their own arrival or their own rise in the Greek mainland and the Peloponnese, there were people that they called the Pelasgians, or the coast people, the shore people. And these are prehistoric peoples that are not what we would think of as ethnically Greek, but lived in Greece before the Greeks themselves. But anyway, I don't believe we have anything that would really qualify as Pelasgian literature, or even anything closely approximating to that, or something that's almost in that department from the Pelasgians. But anyway, the Greeks themselves, the people we think of as the Greeks, when did they first arrive? Well, it's thought that they began arriving late in the 4th millennium BC, and that they moved into the different parts of the Greek world, or mainland Greece and the Peloponnese and the islands and so on, over the course of the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC. And early in the 1st or final millennium BC, they are supposed to have moved into Anatolia, or the western coast of Asia Minor. And I'm not going to use the word Turkey when I describe Asia Minor or Anatolia. I think that's sort of a lazy thing that people do nowadays when we're talking about the ancient world, and obviously there were no Turks there in the ancient world, and so I think it's anachronistic and silly to call it Turkey, so you will never hear me do that. Anyway, another book that I think we'll use just a little bit here is the Handbook to Life in Ancient Greece. This was a textbook that I have from a class in college on Greek civilization, published by Oxford University Press in 1997. The authors are Leslie Adkins and Roy A. Adkins. I don't know if they're a couple or siblings or what, but there are, well, I'm not sure we really need to use this, actually. You can tell I'm not really prepared for this, but it gives us an account of the different periods in Greek history. So, in early times you have a long period which is sometimes called Helladic. So, this would have been spanning much of the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC, and this can be considered a sort of prehistoric or proto-historic period in Greek history, and you've probably heard of some of the civilizations that arose during this time, like the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete and in the surrounding islands. or the Mycenaean civilization on the mainland. And in fact, we do know of writing systems of some kind that these people had, Linear A, the Minoan system, and Linear B, the Mycenaean system. But we don't have any literature written in those languages. We just have more practical documents, really, that are either of a religious character or were used in business or administration. So one famous example I'll show you, I have a souvenir reproduction of it here. Let me go grab that. So this is what's known as the Festos disc, of course, and so this was probably some kind of calendar or some kind of chart for, well, what should we say, for enumerating or plotting out different times of year or holidays or things like that for the people in one of these Minoan centers of population that we call palace complexes that was on the island of Crete. So I don't think this writing is supposed to be Linear A. I think, if I remember right, that it's a system that is unattested elsewhere, or that we don't know much about really, but we have this one example of it and maybe a few others. But anyway, I'll put this back now. So let's see. So those are the really early periods, the Helladic period and the Mycenaean period. And the Greeks themselves, they believed that their great legendary heroes had lived in these times, and although they didn't have a documentary historiographical record of these times, they had a rich oral tradition about them. So the stories that are familiar to us from Greek mythology about the heroes and the Trojan War and all that stuff, the Greeks themselves imagined that this had all happened mostly in the second millennium BC, in the latter half of it, during what we refer to as the Mycenaean Age or the Mycenaean civilization. And so there are some pictures in this book here that I'll show by way of illustrating a little about that period, or showing us some of the famous artifacts from that period, since we don't have any literature from these times to talk about. So this book, Greek Art and Archaeology, another book I have here from college by John Griffiths Pedley. This is the third edition, published in '02, the first being from '93 and the second from '98. There probably are one or two more by now, but anyway, here's a photo of Heinrich Schliemann's excavations at Troy. So, of course, Heinrich Schliemann, the German treasure hunter, archaeologist, discovered the site of Troy and also Mycenae, so he would be an early example of someone who, well, he would be someone who brought these places back to life, so to speak, and sort of opened a door into, well, a door through which modern archaeology could re-enter and explore these lost or shadowy or little-known periods in Greek history. So let's see some artifacts from that time. Here are some of the more famous Minoan artifacts, this pendant and a cover for a sword pommel and the famous snake goddess statue. So there you go. How well does that show up? That looks pretty good, right? So these are some artifacts from the Minoan age. There's also the famous bull leapers wall painting. This famous pot here with an octopus. Again, we're not really talking about art history here. I'm just sort of blazing us a trail into the world of Greek literature. But these are nice pictures anyway, so we may as well get a look at them. And here is the bull leapers and this wall painting showing a woman. I believe it's called La Parisienne. I guess that's what this fanciful name for it is that people gave it in the 19th century when they were rediscovering all these things. This archaeologist Arthur Evans excavated these famous Minoan sites and built these reconstructions there. So here's the original Festos disc, of course. You can see it's baked clay, I think. No, it's terracotta. Yeah, okay, so it's baked clay. But anyway, let's see. There are a lot of things here we could stop to take a look at, but I don't think we will. So let's skip to Mycenae. I've been there myself, and I have some pictures in the other room that I could grab, but anyway, here's a reconstruction, a drawing of the ruins of Mycenae, and it's perhaps best known for these grave circles called tholoi, or beehive-shaped tombs. And so Schliemann, in one of these tombs, he found this great gold mask. He called it Agamemnon's funeral mask, but after the character from Homer and mythology. But actually it's probably the funeral mask of an earlier king. Anyway, so here's a nice painting that is an imaginative reconstruction of what one of the royal chambers or these royal courts would have looked like in a Mycenaean town. So this one is from Pylos, where the character Nestor lives in Homer. So anyway, one of these rooms was called a megaron, a great room, and probably it has certain elements like a hearth in the middle and these big columns and a throne for the king. So these would have been rooms where the business of royal administration would have been carried on. But anyway, this whole period, this heroic age of the Minoans and Mycenaeans seems to have come to an end in the late 13th century BC and over the course of the 12th century BC. So after that, you have what's called a Greek Dark Age, and for simplicity's sake, there are different ways of breaking down and counting these periods, but I think the simplest way is to put the end of the Dark Age around 900 BC. So we call it a Dark Age not because it was really bad in every way, but because we don't have much literature from that time. We don't really have any that I know of, or that I can think of off the top of my head, but that's the Greek Dark Age. And the period after that, from which we have a pretty good deal of literature, is known as the Archaic Age. And so that would be from the 9th century BC down to 480, the time of the Second Persian War, the second time that the Persians invaded the Greek mainland. And so 480 to 323 is known as the Classical Age, and art historians break that down into early, high, and late classical. For our purposes, that's not important, but 323 BC, of course, is the year when Alexander the Great died, and so the period after his lifetime is known as the Hellenistic Age. And of course it's called that because there's a sort of Hellenistic culture that arises in the world, or in the lands conquered by Alexander the Great, and thereafter ruled by his successors, by his close associates who divided up his territory among themselves and fought over it, and their descendants. And so you have all these different Hellenistic kingdoms. And so most of the Greek literature comes from the Archaic Age and the Classical Age and the Hellenistic Age. So there's plenty really from each of these periods, and before that there really isn't any to speak of. So we'll be talking about Homer first. And Homer probably lived early in the Archaic Age, if there was one person named Homer. I mean, that's something that's debated, and it's not, I don't think, a very interesting controversy, but some are inclined to think that the Iliad and the Odyssey are written by two different authors, and others are more inclined to think they're written by the same author, and probably there's a great deal of oral tradition that goes into both epic poems, but in my opinion, they seem to show each one seems to be by a single author. They seem to be sort of virtuoso performances, and the idea that one author wrote both, or not wrote, of course, because they weren't written down until later, but that one author composed both is, I think, not far-fetched. But in any case, I don't think that really matters much for our purposes here. But here's a bust of Homer, just to introduce the Homeric literature. This is a famous bust, a Roman copy of a Greek bust. So the Greek original was probably bronze and probably painted, but the Romans liked marble sculpture that was not painted, so that dates to circa 150 BC. So anyway, let's see if there's anything else I really want to take the time to say here. Well, suffice to say that some of the earlier Greek literature is largely about things that were believed to have gone on in the heroic age, so in this Mycenaean period and the period following it. So most of this stuff, it has to do with heroes and gods and their exploits and adventures. And there was a great wealth of traditional lore about all of these characters, because each district and each city-state and different areas in the Greek world, they all had their local traditions about their own ancient heroes. And so a poet, a wandering poet, like we imagine Homer to have been, who wanted to bring these stories together into grander stories, he would have had plenty of material to use, and in that way he could have gratified all kinds of local residents that he was performing for, or anyway, that he was aiming to please. And so a book that I think is well worth anyone's time who wants to find out or get a clearer mental picture of this period. Well, I'll save this for the next video. So that is an introduction to Greek civilization in general. There's this early heroic age, which you can call the Mycenaean age in a rough and ready way. And you have a dark age, the Archaic age, the Classical age, and the Hellenistic age. And so I think that's probably about enough for now, but this will hopefully serve as our introduction to Greek civilization. And if I come up with more that I want to point out or talk about, then I'll go right ahead and do that. But I'll stop this here. We're at almost 25 minutes. So thanks for watching, and I hope that this next phase in our series exploring ancient literature will be to your liking. So have a great day, have a blessed Sunday, and I hope all is well with you. So we'll see you soon.